Welcome into Words with Wallace. I'm your host, Nick Wallace. Coming at you, it's Thursday, August 7th. What's going on, guys? Been a minute. Been a hot minute since I got you guys a podcast. Been really a full month since my last episode, which is definitely the longest I've gone without recording a podcast since I started this thing a couple years ago. So my apologies. Hasn't been much going on in the NBA world. Definitely the quietest part of the NBA calendar each and every year. I mean, if you're a summer league guy, good for you. I can't quite get there. It's never really indicative of any type of success once you get to the actual NBA. So didn't watch a lot of summer league. Honestly, it's been pretty quiet on the free agent front. We are going to do a bit of a summer news dump today, just kind of going through everything that we missed in the past month, just kind of some free agency loose ends. We had a full carousel of like washed guards that I thought was pretty funny. So we're going to start there. Go through some injury updates, go through again some free agency signings, a lot of extensions. That's probably the most notable news is in the extension department, a lot of big names to talk about there, and then a couple other random trades and some NBA storylines that caught my attention before I let you guys go. I definitely got to ease back slowly into this podcast thing. Going to be a little rusty, so you're going to have to bear with me. Should be a pretty quick episode today, but did want to get an episode out to you guys and get back to our regularly scheduled off-season content. So appreciate you guys being patient with me during the delay. Hopefully I didn't lose all my millions of subscribers, and excited to be back with you on today's episode. So let's get things started with a little bit of free agency news, and specifically our washed guard carousel. That might be being a little bit harsh here, but we got 4 guys that are definitely well past the prime of their career. 2 of these guys are definitely locks for the Hall of Fame, and then, at least one other local Hall of Fame guy in the mix here, so we'll get to that in a second. But let's start off with Bradley Beal and the decision for the Phoenix Suns to buy out the remainder of his contract. And then, of course, Bradley Beal went on to immediately sign with the Los Angeles Clippers. It was a 2-year, $11 million contract for the Clippers. I, for the most part, like that value for Los Angeles, but let's talk about it from the Suns' perspective, because I think that's the real story there. Bradley Beal had $110 million remaining on his contract. I guess he gave back about $14 million of those dollars to make it a little bit easier for him to sign with the Clippers. So ultimately, this is, again, just like what we saw with Damian Lillard, a waive and stretch situation for the Suns and Bradley Beal. They are waiving Bradley Beal. They are buying out the remainder of his contract, and they're going to be paying that out over the span of the next 5 years. So what it averages out to is roughly $20 million a year in dead cap over the next 5 years for the Phoenix Suns. And I think it was a very controversial move when the Bucks did this for Damian Lillard, and they obviously did that to immediately sign Miles Turner. But the Bucks were in a much more desperate situation. Not necessarily a worse situation, but they were more desperate because they were immediately trying to prove to Giannis that they could build a contending team, trying to make him happy, trying to keep him in Milwaukee at all costs. I mean, Giannis is a guy that, again, could be like a top 15 player all time when it's said and done, as crazy as that sounds. So I get the desperation in trying to keep that guy happy and keep that guy there. And while the Suns situation sucks, like, Book is not even close to that level of Giannis, obviously, and that team is in a much more difficult conference, right? And I just think it's a much worse move, all things considered, from the Suns. Like, I just don't really understand the motivation to do this. I've seen mixed reports about Bradley Beal's time in Phoenix. Like, I think casual fans, I think the hate has gone a little too far, right? He definitely didn't look very engaged toward the end of his time in Phoenix, but he did have some decent moments, and you can't just lump all of the blame for the Suns being disappointed on Bradley Beal. Like, I don't think it was quite as bad as the casual fan would think with Beal, but it definitely wasn't great, and it definitely didn't live up to that contract. And if they could go back and undo that Chris Paul trade, I know that they would in a second. It is pretty funny. I did have a Suns guy on a couple years back, right after the Bradley Beal Chris Paul trade happened. I didn't really like the move for the Suns, and he absolutely loved it. He's like, well, Bradley Beal has to be better than Chris Paul, and look at how that turned out. So just one take there that I had to do a quick little victory lap on. But nonetheless, I don't like it for the Suns. I just don't understand why you wouldn't just keep Bradley Beal on the team at that point. I understand the backcourt's crowded. I understand he might not be very happy to play there, and then now he's suddenly coming off the bench to a guy like Jalen Green. You already have Devin Booker there, so I get that it's a little crowded, but I just don't understand the rush for the Suns to put themselves in a much more difficult situation over the next 4 years when there's no rush to be competitive. Nobody's picking the Suns to win a bunch of games. And even Devin Booker, who again got an extension, we'll talk about him in a little bit, I don't think he's exactly banging the door to get on out of there based on the recent extension that he received. So hate it from the Suns' perspective, to be totally honest. They should have just stuck it out with Bradley Beal, or maybe look to dump him at this time next year instead of waiving and stretching him over the next 5 years. But from the Clippers perspective, I do like it, right? I mean, it's a 2-year, $11 million contract, so barely anything to pay for Bradley Beal. That makes the stakes a lot different. They needed him to replace Norm Powell after they made the decision to trade him to Miami. In exchange, they got John Collins in a deal that happened earlier in the offseason. So while I think Norm Powell is much better than Bradley Beal at this point in their respective careers, that's definitely a downgrade. Some people might disagree with that, but I still think Beal is a suitable replacement, right? He's still a great scorer. He's still a plus 3-point shooter. He's still a veteran. And, basically there's a ton of old guys in Los Angeles. So they're all on the same timeline. Maybe that fits a little bit better in LA than it did in Phoenix. So that's the first piece of news we have there. The next wash guard we have to talk about is my guy, or my former guy rather, Marcus Smart. Obviously always going to love him as a Celtics fan. He was bought out by the Washington Wizards, and he signed with the Los Angeles Lakers on a 2-year, $10 million contract. So again, basically identical contract to Bradley Beal, barely anything for what the Lakers have to pay him over the next 2 seasons. And as much as I hate it as a Celtics fan, like the idea of seeing Marcus Smart in a Lakers jersey obviously makes me sick, I can't deny I like the swing for the Lakers. They just need some guys with defensive identities on that team, especially after losing Dorian Finney-Smith, and Marcus Smart is that. He's a winner, he's a dog, he's a competitor. I know he's over the hill. I know that there's major physical concerns with him at this point in time, but just getting somebody that's going to take some ownership in the defensive end of the court is going to be big for that locker room. They don't have a ton of guards off the bench that you really trust. I mean, it's Smart, it's Gabe Vincent, and beyond that, it's all kind of up in the air, to be totally honest with you. So I like that move. Maybe Bronny can learn a thing or two from him. Who knows? I will say that with his health concerns, I think the first thing that's going to go with him on the defensive end of the court is his ability to stay in front of quick guards, which I think the Lakers still need. Like, Smart's still going to be a plus defender. He's probably going to be a little bit better at this point in his career and staying in front of bigger guys, guarding wings at this point. Like, the idea of him guarding like a super fast guard on the other team, just I don't really think is going to be realistic. And they still need some smaller defenders that are going to go in there and play high level defense. I don't know who that's going to be on the Lakers roster, but I don't hate the signing of getting Smart in the building. They needed to fill out that roster with some veterans, and I think 2 years, $10 million for Smart is obviously a great deal, and I'm always going to love that guy no matter what. Moving on, next wash guard we have here, arguably my favorite of these 3 signings is Chris Paul going back to the Los Angeles Clippers. So we obviously have 2 different Clippers moves here. It's a 1-year, $3.6 million contract for Chris Paul. So literally nothing. I mean, that is as cheap as a contract as you're going to get for Chris Paul. And he had more in the tank last year than what a lot of people probably remember. I know the Spurs season really just was basically over when Wemby got that blood clot and he was out for the remainder of the season. Everybody stopped paying attention to the Spurs, and for decent reason. But Chris Paul was really solid all year long. Decent scoring numbers, decent assist numbers. Obviously, the defense isn't all the way there, but to have a backup point guard that you really trust, especially behind James Harden, to manage his workload a little bit. I know James Harden has been super durable. I just like that signing for Chris Paul. I mean, again, it's truly the unction out there in Los Angeles with Chris Paul, Bradley Beal, James Harden, Kawhi Leonard. Like, it's a very old team. But I kind of like it. I mean, if they're going to give it one last ride with Kawhi and at the centerpiece of this team, like, you might as well do it with other guys that are on that timeline. And then maybe you can look to get a little bit younger next season, depending on how this year goes. But it's obviously a great reunion, too. I know Clippers fans are super fired up about it. They have very fond memories of Chris Paul with the Clippers. I know the playoff success wasn't always there, but to deny how good Chris Paul was for that team, arguably the best years maybe of his entire career. I know he was really good early on in New Orleans as well, but I like that signing. There's no risk. I think Chris Paul was going to be a perfect backup point guard for whatever team landed him, and that's truly a steal at 1 year, $3.6 million. Loved it last year when he signed with the Spurs. Love it again this year for the Clippers. And then the final stop on the washed guard carousel we have here, we got to talk about Damian Lillard to Portland, man. And I don't love it. I do think it's a cool sports story. We have 2 reunions in a row here with Chris Paul going back to the Clippers and, of course, Dame going back to Portland, where he spent the vast majority of his career before that brief stint in Milwaukee. But it's a 3-year, $42 million contract for Damian Lillard. So just about $15 million a year. Really, it's like $21 million a year when you think about the fact that he's going to be missing all of next season. Like, he's basically going to be a borderline assistant coach to Chauncey Billups next year. But I just don't like it for a couple different reasons. Like, again, I understand the loyalty. I think it's cool that he wanted to go back to Portland. He wanted to cement his legacy. Like, he has a chance of being one of the best players in the history of the franchise. I mean, he already is. Still got to put, like, Bill Walton probably in that upper echelon because he ultimately got over the hump and won a title. After that, you can start discussing Dame. But 3 years, $42 million is just a lot of money. Like, Dame was really good. Like, obviously, if he plays at the same level he did that season, it's going to end up being a steal of his contract. But to project that out a full year from now, and then suddenly he has to basically play as well as, again, like a $20 million a year player is just pretty far fetched for a small guard coming off the most devastating injury, really, in all of sports, off of a torn Achilles. Like, that's really scary. Not to mention, I just don't know what this means for a really crowded backcourt already. I mean, they made some progress when they traded Anthony Simons to the Celtics by getting him out of there a little bit. Like, at least they brought in Drew Holiday, who's more of a defensive-minded guard at a different stage of his career, adding to the really nice defensive stretch that Portland had at the end of the season last year. But you bring in Damian Lillard, and it's like, oh my gosh, like, you have Scoot there still. That's obviously who they hope to be the future of that point guard position. They also have Shaedon Sharpe, who has had some major flashes at times. Now you have Drew Holiday. Now you have Damian Lillard. Like, it's just crowded. I don't think that's what that Portland team needs. It finally feels like they had their own direction. They were leaning into this defensive identity. And then they bring in Dame Lillard. So I know that, and I promise I'm not bitter here. I know that there was some buzz about Damian Lillard going to the Celtics because of the whole Achilles injury, the fact that he was rehabbing with Tatum a little bit. There was some buzz about that. And even with the Celtics, I wasn't super high of the fit of Dame in Boston just because we already have Peyton Pritchard. The team is just completely leveled up since we stopped having a really small guard that we had to hide on the defensive end of the court, and Dame is definitely going to be that once he finally returns from this Achilles injury. But, I mean, a part of me did want to see Dame in Boston just because I love Damian Lillard. He's one of my favorite players to watch really ever, and so I probably would have talked myself into it. But I wouldn't have at that price point. I mean, 3 years, $42 million is crazy. I don't know if it was like the loyalty that brought him back or the fact that Portland probably paid more than what anyone else was willing to do. And again, it was just one more year than I even thought. I thought at most he was going to get a 2-year contract. So as much as it is a cool sports story, I will be rooting for Dame. I always will root for that guy. I just don't like it. I think it's a bad move for the Blazers. I think it counteracts the direction that they were headed, and I can't get behind it. So let's keep it moving and talk about some other kind of shitty news here. We have a bunch of injury updates to get to. A few like kind of footnotes on some offseason surgeries that happened and were kind of reported after the fact. Starting off with Paul George. He got a surgery on July 14th on his left knee, and this was due to an injury that he suffered in an offseason workout. So new knee injury specifically for Paul George, and another surgery for PG. And this is just a huge bummer if you're Sixers fans. Like, I'm not a doctor. I don't know exactly what this is going to mean for Paul George, but it does just seem like getting another offseason surgery and another offseason injury after he completely fell off productivity-wise last season. Like, he was so disappointing. And a lot of people make fun of Philly for that signing, but I defended it in the moment when they signed him. I thought he was like the cream of the crop of free agency just because he was so damn good the year before for the Clippers. I think I had him on like third team All-NBA the previous season. And you know how quickly we forget how good Paul George was just a couple years ago. And so another surgery is just a really tough look for Paul George. I'm just really not bullish on what he's going to deliver next year. I know there was a crazy Joel Embiid article that came out, and it's definitely worth the read as well. So not great news coming out of the two Sixers old stars. I know there's a lot of excitement for Jared McCain and Maxey and their draft pick, VJ Edgecombe. But as far as the production that we can expect from Paul George, I'm a little bit more bearish. Maybe I would have talked myself into had he not gotten another injury. Also another surgery for Derek Lively of the Dallas Mavericks as well. He received foot surgery the day after Paul George's surgery on July 15th to remove some bone spurs in his foot. Again, not a doctor, but foot injury on a guy that's over 7 feet tall. That's been a reoccurring injury at this point in time. Just not a good look. The guy's super young, plenty of time to overcome this. Not projecting anything, but I'm just saying, little sketchy. Now, obviously, they have a lot of depth in the front court. They re-signed Gafford to a pretty fat contract this offseason, and maybe for good reason, right? You have injury concerns with Anthony Davis, injury concerns with Lively, and at least you have Gafford there as somebody that you can really count on at that position, but just something that makes you feel a little uneasy. So at least the Mavericks have depth at that position. And then the final piece of injury news here, we have Derek Queen, the rookie draft pick in New Orleans. Now, Queen has gotten a lot of buzz mainly because he was a part of arguably the most controversial trade of the offseason, in which the Pelicans traded up 10 spots in the draft to select Derek Queen at, I believe, number 13, and in exchange they gave away the best of either an unprotected Pelicans pick next year or an unprotected Bucks pick next year. Whatever one is more favorable goes to the Hawks. So massive price to pay just to move up 10 spots in the draft and and get Derek Queen. Obviously, the Pelicans are completely in love with this guy, but unfortunately, he tore a ligament in his wrist during Summer League, and he's going to be out at least 3 months, which, if you're doing the math, that brings you to the start of October. So, tough injury there for a guy going through, obviously, his first NBA offseason, going through his first training camp, and a guy that there have been some questions about how in shape he's been at times. So just don't love that. I mean, obviously the Pelicans could have never seen that coming. They get a bit of a pass there, but it's going to be really tough for Queen to immediately cash in on the lofty expectations that are on him, especially as he rehabs from an injury. Now let's get into some free agency loose ends, starting off with a couple smaller contracts that I think actually could be pretty impactful for some teams in the East. Starting off with Cole Anthony, he was actually bought out by the Orlando Magic and then signed with the Milwaukee Bucks on a 1-year, $2.6 million contract. This actually might have happened before I recorded my last podcast, but I did miss this either way and thought it was relevant enough to mention on the podcast. Cole Anthony's a nice player. He was actually really important for an Orlando team that was abysmal on offense for the better part of the last decade, for that matter. And he can immediately come off the bench and get you some buckets. And for a Bucks team that is pretty devoid of offensive talent, he'll be a nice backup to, I'm assuming, Kevin Porter Jr. at this point in time. Orlando really leaned on that guy heavy at times. Now, Orlando was able to heavily improve their backcourt this offseason, obviously trading for Desmond Bane. They also signed Ty Jerome and Tyus Jones, so no longer a need for Cole Anthony at that point, but I like that the Bucks were able to capitalize on that. Still can't say I'm bullish on the Bucks at all. As much as I love Giannis, it's just such a skeleton crew around him with Cole Anthony, and then you have Miles Turner, you have Kevin Porter Jr., you have Kyle Kuzma, AJ Green. I mean, it's just Gary Trent. Everybody's on decent contracts for what it's worth. Besides Giannis, of course, who's making a boatload of money, but I can't quite get there on the Bucks. It really is just a testament to how much you believe in Giannis. If you think the Bucks can be a 45-win team, then you really are just a big fan of Giannis and what he can do. Wouldn't be that surprising, but ultimately with the idea of them being a contender is pretty far-fetched in my mind. Nice little move here for my Boston Celtics that took place just earlier this week. They signed Chris Boucher, formerly of the Toronto Raptors, to a 1-year, $3.3 million contract. He's kind of like a big wing. I think he plays more like a wing than he does a big. Maybe earlier in his career it was the inverse, but I just feel like he's really great attacking the basket. He's a high energy guy. He's always just making shit happen when he comes onto the court. I think I had found a reason to work him into a previous podcast. Maybe when we were doing the tier rankings and I had to talk about the Raptors, but I've always really liked Chris Boucher. So the fact that you bring him in 1 year, $3 million in this season, that's ultimately probably going to be a lost year with the Tatum injury and all the other moves and the salary dumps that we had to do earlier in the offseason. I just like the idea of bringing Chris Boucher. No idea what the rest of that front court looks like, and there's plenty of time later in the offseason to talk about what the Celtics are going to be doing later in the year and what the expectations for this season should be. So still some concerns in the front court, but I do like the Chris Boucher signing. Going into some extension talk now, we have Isaiah Jackson returning to the Indiana Pacers on a 3-year, $21 million contract. Jackson got hurt. It might have even been an Achilles injury, if I'm not mistaken, earlier this season. I'll have to double check that, but he's a fantastic athlete, was a great high-energy big off the bench for the Pacers. Obviously, they let Miles Turner walk and sign with Milwaukee this offseason. They did bring in Jay Huff for a really cheap price, which I liked, and now they have a backup big in Isaiah Jackson. So, again, it's really going to be tough to project what the Pacers do this season with presumably no Halliburton. I mean, definitely no Halliburton. That injury was just so late into the year. So I'm not optimistic on the Pacers, but at least they were able to retain some front court depth that will bleed into the following season when Halliburton is back. A really nice move for the Pelicans, who desperately needed it here. Herb Jones signed an extension with the team, a 3-year, $68 million extension, keeps him under contract through 28-29 season with a player option the year after that. So they have a locked up Herb Jones long-term, pretty cheap deal too, 22-ish million dollars a year once that extension kicks in. Not bad at all. Some people would argue that Herb Jones is probably the best trade chip on the Pelicans. I bet Trey Murphy at this point is probably kind of past him in those ranks. Certainly this time last year, people looked at Herb Jones in that light because he is an all-NBA level defender, just a really exciting wing that can also shoot the ball well, has some offensive chops. I know he has had some injury issues lately, and last season was kind of a wash, but smart for the Pelicans to sign him when his value is a little bit lower coming off of that injury. I mean, that guy's a stud. Everybody loves Herb Jones. They still have the ability to trade this guy, so love that for the Pelicans. Definitely the lone bright spot of the offseason so far, at least in my opinion. 2 massive moves for your defending champion Thunder. locking up the second and third parts of that big three they have in OKC. Jalen Williams, J-Dub, got a 5-year, $287 million max extension. And shortly after that, Chet got a 5-year, $250 million max extension. Obviously, that's a shitload of money, and I know you might be asking yourself, what does this mean for the team? We know that Shea got a fat contract, the biggest contract in NBA history, literally just like a month ago at this point in time. So how do they possibly have the ability to pay all three guys? I'm not Bobby Marks, so I can't answer that question. But I can tell you that, like, this is Bobby Marks approved. All the smart NBA cap guys love this because the Thunder still have flexibility. They still, with the way the rest of that roster is constructed, the fact that all these guys are so young, like, they are actually in a really good spot, even with the new CBA heavily penalizing teams that go into that second apron. The Thunder should be all right and still have plenty of maneuverability. I had a little bit more fresh in my head when this happened, and so forgive me, this was a couple weeks ago at this point, but obviously, like, it's a no-brainer. Like, those two guys, you just won a championship with them. The future is so bright for this team. J-Dub is already an all-NBA level player. Chet already has, like, all defensive level potential. Love those signings. You had to do it, and the Thunder were able to execute that early, and now they have their big three under contract for, like, at least 5 years moving forward. More extension talk we have here. Devin Booker, 2-year, $145 million extension. That's insane. Over $70 million a year for Book. I mean, I guess you had to do it, right? Like, Phoenix is in no position to lose Devin Booker. They want to keep that guy happy. It is a little similar to the Bucks situation like we talked about, but obviously Book isn't close to being the player that Giannis is, but he is a fantastic player in his own right. Like, it is just worth noting that he's content in Phoenix, right? He better not do the shit where he demands a trade no matter how bad it gets, because he obviously chose to make as much money as humanly possible, and the Suns paid him that this offseason with this extension. Next extension we have here, we got to go over to New York, talk about the Knicks, and Mikal Bridges' discounted extension. A 4-year, $150 million contract is a shitload of money for Mikal Bridges, but you already paid a shitload of draft picks just to bring him into the building. It is worth noting, like, I had to double check. I'm like, does he make more than Brunson now? He doesn't, but it's, like, really close. If you guys remember, Brunson famously took a discounted contract a couple years back just so the team would have more flexibility. It is funny, like, obviously they have to spend that money, like, they will spend that money, and they are investing it in really good players, and Mikal Bridges and OG Anunoby, and I totally get all that, but it is just, like, kind of funny where it doesn't feel like Mikal Bridges took a discount. Apparently he took, like, within $10 million of a discount just to have a little bit more flexibility for the Knicks front office, so I guess he kind of shared the same sentiment as Brunson, but the idea that they're making basically identical bread when Brunson is infinitely more valuable, it is kind of funny to me. Like, nobody took nearly as much of a discount as Brunson. I think OG is still, like, the highest paid player on the Knicks, which is pretty funny, even though he's awesome in his own right. So I just wanted to cover that extension news in New York. Again, you kind of had to do it. The Knicks had a great season and the East is wide open, so I don't necessarily hate that. It is just a lot of money for a guy that can be pretty inconsistent on the offensive end of the court. Arguably the best extension, I mean, definitely the best extension in terms of value. Luka Doncic the other day signed a 3-year, $165 million extension with the Los Angeles Lakers. So any sort of worry in the Lakers front office that Luka might not want to stay there long term, I don't know how real that was. I don't think it was ever a real story, but it was just worth noting because he was coming up to the end of his current contract. And honestly, 3 years, $165 million, so $55 million a year for 3 years for Luka Doncic, that is a massive steal for the Lakers. Like, I understand that is the max amount that they could have possibly paid him. Again, Luka kind of got screwed financially by getting traded because he would have been able to sign a supermax extension with the Mavericks had he just stayed in Dallas and not been traded. So it's not like Pelinka pulled a fast one and was able to, like, lowball Luka and get him to agree to it. It's not like that. It's just a situation that Luka found himself in after the trade. But again, $55 million for Luka is a steal. Like, for reference, you know, Shea, fantastic player. If you want to say that Shea's better than Luka because of what he brings you on defense and, you know, there's no health concerns and he just won the title, like, I get all that. I still think Luka and Shea are, like, neck and neck when it comes to value. If Luka has a better season, he could easily end up leaping Shea overall this season, as crazy as that sounds. And Luka's making basically $16 million less per year than Shea. So that is a competitive advantage that the Lakers have by being able to pay Luka just $55 million when Shea's making, like, $72 million a year. And again, it's a great contract for the Thunder and Shea. Like, they had to do that there too. But when we're talking about the guys that are on that top tier of NBA player, it's Jokic, Giannis, Shea, and then Luka. I think those guys are the top tier. If you want to say Jokic is in his own tier, that's fine with me too. But like, that is the upper echelon of NBA stars right about now. And your guy, if you're the Lakers, is making a significant amount less than those other guys. So that is a competitive advantage for the Lakers. Love that contract. And now at least they don't have to worry about Luka getting out of town anytime soon. It is interesting how, I don't want to get into too much, like how this affects like the whole LeBron thing. Like, I didn't really want to get into the LeBron stuff because I think it's like a non-story. Like, I read some articles, I've seen some LeBron headlines over the past month or so. Like, there's obviously tension between LeBron and the team because, again, he opted into his player option and he will, as of right now, hit unrestricted free agency this time next year. So it is notable. LeBron's not often in that situation. But I do wonder how this Luka contract kind of changes the leverage. Like, maybe they were being a little cold to LeBron because they wanted to make sure that this Luka contract got locked up first, because Luka is a better player at this point. He's also a lot younger, so obviously he is the future of that team. But now that Luka's taken care of, like, I'm not saying they just like push Luka to the side, but like maybe the Lakers can invest a little bit more at making sure LeBron and his camp aren't so pissy during the offseason. I don't really know, but I'm sure Pelinka is doing jumping jacks thinking about this extension, and I think for the most part, like, the LeBron stuff is a non-story. If it develops, we will definitely cover it here on this podcast. And then the final extension, I think this one happened most recently, just earlier this week. De'Aaron Fox and the San Antonio Spurs reached a 4-year, $229 million extension. I feel like everybody on Twitter, and myself included, had like the same reaction. It was just kind of like, ugh. Like, a great player. De'Aaron Fox is a really great player. And he was awesome in Sacramento. It was a really small sample size with him in San Antonio, but it was definitely disappointing for like it probably wasn't more than like 5 or 10 games that he actually played with Wemby before Wemby again got that blood clot, and then Fox had his own injury and the Spurs shut him down promptly. So he certainly didn't flash in the short time he was in San Antonio. And then you just start to look at like the log jam at the guard position with them drafting Castle, who was obviously the reigning rookie of the year. He was even better than expected. You took him super early in the draft. I'm not a massive college basketball guy, so I don't know the most about Dylan Harper. He was obviously the number 2 overall pick in the draft this year for the Spurs. People are super high on him and the idea of him being the point guard of the future because he's huge and there's less defensive concerns with him there. And he's also a fantastic pick and roll player. And I mean, I'd be a great pick and roll player too if I was playing with Wemby, but whatever. I mean, I just don't know if Fox is truly the future of that team. That's all I was saying. It did look for a second there like the true big 3 that the Spurs were going to move forward with, and this is obviously projecting quite a bit, was going to be Wemby, Castle, and Harper, right? Like, that is the backcourt of the future. Now, things would have got really testy with Fox, like, because he called out the Spurs as like the one team that he wanted to get traded to. It kind of came out of nowhere in the middle of last season. The Spurs pounced on it. They made it happen. I gave them a lot of props for making it happen and honestly not giving up all that much. So they definitely would have been going back on their word if they didn't sign Fox to the maximum amount that he could have been paid just because they got lucky in the lottery and were able to draft Dylan Harper. But it is just a lot of money to a team that had like no long-term commitments, no like significant contracts out there. And now you're paying a lot to De'Aaron Fox, who, again, Wemby's going to end up getting a max extension here soon. And, he'll end up obviously making more than Fox and he'll be the highest paid player on the team. But for now, it's Fox, and you have a lot of money invested in Fox, and we're just not completely married to the idea of him being the point guard of the future for the Spurs until we find out what Harper does. But at least there's no like weird tension going into the season. Like, Fox is a great player. He is worth a lot of money, and you didn't lose that asset for nothing. But he's certainly like, he's making basically the same amount as Luka, right? And it's like he's just not even close to a Luka level player. And I know you can't do that team to team, but it's just something that I would feel not the best about, right? It's like a C+ contract at best for the San Antonio Spurs, but I get why they had to do it. And finally, we had a couple of quick trades to report on. We have a trade with the San Antonio Spurs. They've had a busy last couple of weeks or so. They traded for Kelly Olynyk. In return, the Washington Wizards received Malachi Branham, Blake Wesley, and a second-round pick. Olynyk, obviously a former Celtic there as well. He can still hoop. He's just had some injury issues over the past couple of years, but I do like that the Spurs went out and fortified their depth behind Wemby. They signed Luke Cornett, again, another former Celtic earlier in the offseason. Now they have Kelly Olynyk, so they have like another stretch big option out there, which again, if Olynyk is healthy, it's going to be like a no-brainer steal, like the Spurs crushed it. And if Olynyk isn't healthy, then maybe it wasn't worth giving up some young pieces in a second-round pick. But it's a small price to pay no matter what, and wanted to report on it on this podcast. And then definitely my favorite move. Make no mistake. I mean, I buried the lead here, honestly. This is really what inspired me to dust off the microphone tonight and actually record a podcast, is the fact that Georges Niang, not on my team, not on my Boston Celtics. Now, there will be a period in time when we look back in history where he was on the Celtics for about a month. You know, he was a part of that Kristaps Porzingis deal. He's technically been the Celtic for a month, but, you know, when you're playing the Immaculate Grid and you see Celtics and Hawks or whatever other team you want to put in for Georges Niang, it's going to be incorrect. He never played a game for the Boston Celtics. So Georges Niang, I can't stand the guy. He has been traded to the Utah Jazz in exchange for RJ Lewis. And also, the Celtics were able to recoup 2 second-round picks along with RJ Lewis as well. I'm doing jumping jacks right now. Again, I get it. Georges Niang is actually like a fine NBA player, putting my bias to the side. But if I can't like sports hate somebody that was just a complete douchebag every time he plays the Celtics, then I don't want to be a basketball fan. If I can't still sports hate people irrationally and voice that on my podcast, then what's the point of having a podcast, right? What's the point of watching sports? So I sports hate Georges Niang so much. I love this deal for the Celtics. We get a couple second-round picks. RJ Lewis was the dude from St. John's that had a really awesome season, and then he just like melted down in the tournament, and then Patino benched him in the last couple minutes of the game. That was one of the few March Madness games that I watched, and I hated the move. Like, really not even trying to defend my now Celtic RJ Lewis, but I was like, dude, I don't care if he's 0-30. Like, he's your best chance and really your only offensive creator on St. John's at that point, and you're not even going to have a chance to go out and give him a chance to win the game for your team when you really needed points in a hurry. Like, hated that move from Rick Pitino, but that's why he got bounced in like the second round or whatever. And RJ Lewis was also a former Minuteman. Shout out UMass Amherst. I guess he was at UMass for a year before he transferred to St. John's, and obviously his college career blossomed from there. So I have no idea if that guy's going to turn into anything, but the headline for the Celtics is, again, it's another cap-saving move. You get a couple extra second-round picks, and the Jazz get a serviceable player in Georges Niang, but he was never on the Celtics, so I am absolutely thrilled about that. So before I let you guys go, a couple more things to focus on. Honestly, you know, my favorite move we just covered was obviously the Niang trade. Like, I'm very, very much still excited about that. But my favorite story that came out in the NBA universe over the past month was Nikola Jokic. I'd imagine he's back home in Serbia. He seems to love his homeland more than nearly any other player in the NBA. And there's a very famous video that you guys have probably seen by now where Jokic, he races horses. Horses are his big off-season hobby. Maybe it's more of a lifestyle for him. You'd have to ask him about that. But it looks like he has a horse in a race, right? They're racing horses, probably back home. And his horse wins the race. And Jokic is just sobbing. Like, he is so emotional. And the camera, like, zooms in on him. And the tears are coming down. And he's covering his face. And he's on the track. He's giving people hugs. And it is just so fucking funny. Like, I've watched that video so many times, man. Like, again, and I know, like, it's overplayed at this point. Like, people saying that Jokic doesn't care about basketball. He doesn't care about the NBA. But, like, you put the videos side by side of his horse winning this race. I really have no idea what it means, you know, what the significance of the race was. Obviously, I'm not well-versed in horse racing and certainly not overseas horse racing. And then you put it side by side to him winning the championship in 2023. And that shit's like night and day, man. Like, it is not even close to as emotional. And maybe you can make the argument like a horse race, it happens quick. You don't know you're going to win, and then suddenly you're there. I don't know what the odds were in that situation. Whereas, you know, Jokic going into the finals, it was a pretty comfortable 5-game series win over the Miami Heat. So he probably knew he was going to win for like a while there. The games weren't super close. So maybe you can point to that. But like, man, for him to just be sobbing about his horse and then like he's like, win his parade. Like, I want to go home. Like, immediately after winning the NBA title. Could be some merit to how little he cares about the NBA. And on that note, too, shortly after that, DeMarcus Cousins, former NBA All-Star, a guy that I really enjoyed watching when he was playing for the Kings. Everybody's got a podcast now. I don't know if it was DeMarcus Cousins' podcast, like his own, or if he was appearing on a different one. But a story came out where DeMarcus Cousins claims that when he was on the Nuggets, teammates with Jokic right before DeMarcus Cousins retired, it was in 2022, he claims that he was having a conversation with Jokic, and Jokic mentioned that he just wanted to retire. Like, he was just tired of playing in the NBA, and this was right before Jokic signed a $276 million contract the following offseason. And if you want the full story, I mean, you can look it up and give DeMarcus Cousins some more views there. But basically, Cousins is claiming that, he was completely over playing basketball, and he was really thinking about retiring, and Boogie had to be in his ear like, dude, get that $300 million before you retire. Like, who cares what you do after that? But I just want to say, like, as much as I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth here, like, I don't believe that. I didn't believe DeMarcus Cousins for 1 second. Like, I feel like he just capitalized on the moment of that horse video being really funny, and he just wanted to play into the fact that Jokic doesn't care. I do not believe for 1 second that Jokic actually contemplated retirement. Like, he is still really competitive when he's out there. If anything, he would have contemplated retirement after the 2023 season. I wouldn't really be worried about Jokic just, like, randomly retiring, right? Like, if extension talks drag out and Jokic hasn't re-signed for a while, I definitely would be more nervous with Jokic if I'm a Nuggets fan than maybe any other superstar in the NBA. It does seem like he is more likely to disappear and drop off the face of the earth, but he's still super competitive. You have to love basketball to be as good at the sport as he is. So I do think the DeMarcus Cousins story, if you saw that, it's a little overplayed, despite the fact that he does objectively love horses much more than he does the NBA. That much we can agree on. So before I let you guys go, I did just want to say as well, like, the remaining dominoes to focus on here in the NBA offseason are definitely the restricted free agents, right? And just to summarize what that means for those that might not be super dialed in on NBA free agency is that if you're a restricted free agent, the free agents are free to get offers from other teams, right? And sign offers from other teams. The thing is that the team that they are currently on has the opportunity to match that contract. So it definitely waters down the market quite a bit. And it's just particularly fascinating this year because I think there are some really good names in restricted free agency, and we're approaching mid-August at this point and nothing has happened with it yet. The names are Jonathan Kuminga, Josh Giddey, Quentin Grimes, who was a revelation at the end of last season, and Cam Thomas, who's an absolute bucket getter. They're all unsigned right now. And I don't know what this means. I don't know if this is partially due to the new CBA and this is watering down the restricted free agency market even more, or if it just pertains to these specific players. Like, obviously, all these guys have their flaws. Kuminga's talented, can't fit in with a great Golden State system. Giddey, we saw his warts on display a couple years ago in the playoffs with OKC. He was basically unplayable. Grimes, up and down career, and then just 3 months where he's just like scorched earth. Maybe teams aren't believing it. And then Cam Thomas doesn't have a pass button on his controller, so to speak. So a flawed player there as well, but all talented players. Like, I think ultimately these guys will end up signing with the teams that they're on. Like, that has to be the clubhouse lead. Like, if there was a guy that I could see end up on a different team, it's probably most likely to be Kuminga, just because there's been so much trade buzz on him over the past couple years. It could easily turn into a sign and trade situation since he is a restricted free agent. But I'm just like so surprised that none of these guys have been signed at this point in time. So I wonder if the Players Association will take a closer look at restricted free agency and maybe being a restricted free agent is more damaging now than what it's been in the past, because it does seem like their markets have been subdued quite a bit, even though all four of those guys are really good players. So we'll see what happens with Kuminga, Giddey, Grimes, and Cam Thomas moving forward. So that's going to do it for this podcast today. Thank you guys for listening. Hopefully you didn't mind me shaking off the rust too much. Did want to cover, again, all of the major NBA storylines that have taken place over the next month. Honestly, as far as off-season content, I definitely want to keep bringing you guys weekly or at least bi-weekly podcasts just to keep the content train rolling. I definitely want to crank up the social media content. But to be honest with you, I don't know what you want to hear in the offseason. Like, it is tough. Like, there really isn't much happening. Obviously, if NBA news breaks and one of those restricted free agent signs, if there's a trade, like, we will talk about it on this podcast. But besides that, I need something to build these episodes around. So my first thought is I want to bring some guests on. I'd love to do a deep dive on some of the more interesting teams in the offseason. I haven't had a guest on in a while. I think that would be my top tier of how I see the next couple episodes go. But if you like the offseason ranking series that we've done in the past, we've done top 10 lists at each position. You guys tell me if there are any people listening to this point in the podcast and have ideas for future podcasts. Please let me know. I mean, the offseason, this is a time to get shots up, right? We can try new things. We can get weird with it. So anything that you guys want to hear, definitely let me know. And be sure to follow @WordsWithWallace on everything. That includes Spotify, Apple Music, wherever you get your podcasts. social media at Words with Wallace on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and TikTok. I'm definitely going to be cranking out some reels from my last few podcasts there in the near future as well. So I will talk to you guys hopefully next week. Peace.